Thanks. I wanted to first make an observation that, just like Brother Chuck has been influenced by Indian culture, I think, at least when I speak for myself, I'm sure this is also applies to some of the others, that we are so influenced by American culture, of course, as well, and not just popular culture in terms of movies and music, but also, the history and the literature that has come from that country. And I've lived in the States also for 7 years, but on the East Coast. I did do a road trip for 8 weeks from coast to coast, East Coast to West Coast, and spent a fair amount of time in Texas. And I had a fantastic experience in Texas. I mean, driving through and visiting places. But as you yourself mentioned, it is a sort of conservative part of the world in terms of
Yes.
its, and especially when it comes to religion, except for small pockets like Austin, perhaps, and a few others. So
Yes.
I'm curious actually as to, and this is not for Texas per se, but just it's a good example to take. How do Masons anywhere around the world, let's take Texas, Fort Worth area, Dallas, Fort Worth, for the moment, how do they reconcile the universality of the message of Freemasonry and the equality of religions that
Mm.
personal practice of religion in a more confined manner? And I ask this also because I notice in India, for example, in the UK, uh, traditional taboo topics, religion and politics, somehow is creeping up a lot in Masonic discourse. So
Mm.
I'm curious as to how do Masons reconcile that, do you think?
Yes. Um, I'm quite sure that some don't reconcile it. They're not the least interested in reconciling it. They're not even aware that there's any reconciliation to be done. There are a great number of Masons um, in in my personal network who think of it essentially as just an extension of Judeo-Christian religion, but one that welcomes men of other religions to come sit in the room with them. Um, but if you ask them, okay, what's this really all about? Um, then one of the common answers in my neck of the woods is to point toward the Knight Templar degree and say that's what it's all about, because that's where you have to be a Christian, and where they explain everything that has led up to that point in Christian terms. Um, I think for men who are uh, deeply immersed in Christianity as they know it and are not interested in any other religious experience, that as a personal experience of Freemasonry can be a very beautiful thing. But it disturbs me when they haven't seemed to do the reconciliation, the integration of, wait a second, we have been saying all along up to this point that Freemasonry is not just about welcoming men of other faiths, but that we are supposed to be finding common ground with each other, that our rituals and symbolism are supposed to be speaking to each of us in ways that connect with the commonality underlying religion. Well, the idea of something common underlying all religion can be difficult and even offensive to some brothers. Um, I see, however, a growing trend that younger men are coming into the fraternity with less difficulty along these lines, because through their education, they've already um, been given opportunities to consider some of these ideas. Um, the profane world, the culture of the profane world has in some ways progressed beyond where Masonic culture is in certain areas, in certain places. And I would say that in a lot of lodges in Texas, that's the case. But the younger men are coming in with that understanding, that greater openness, wanting a richer cultural experience, wanting to understand the commonalities of different traditions. And that's part of what many of us are calling the American Masonic Renaissance, that is happening, a shift away from Freemasonry being seen as more or less a kind of rite of passage into an old idea of Western manhood, and more into a kind of a view of maturity, of spiritual and intellectual maturity that was more common in previous generations prior to, I would say, the 20th century.
Okay. Chuck, I have a quick question with respect to the initial bit which you spoke about. Like, was it religion that brought this kind of a change which you are talking about? You specifically mentioned that obviously since you were at that location and the religious stuff was actually right next to you, is it that why you started looking into the contemplative portion of it? Is that, and by the way, if that is the case, what would you say for anyone, or rather a young Mason who's actually joining, how can he bring religion into this perspective with Freemasonry and do a progress?
Yeah. I think my religious experiences as a child naturally tapped into a part of who I am as an individual, that wanted to flower and blossom in this life. And my interests and my depth of thought and contemplation, even as a child, I mean, I remember as a child at night, it was our practice that, I would pray with my parents every night before I would go to sleep. And the prayers that we would do, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I hope the Lord my soul to take. And that whole idea of death, mortality, right? As a young child, confronting that in this prayer at nighttime. And then also the idea of there's something beyond this life that I would be taken into if I should experience the limits of my mortality in the middle of the night. And so that led me into this contemplation of infinity and what is infinity and what is eternal. What do those words even mean? And I can remember at the age of 8 years in my bed at night in deep meditation on what is infinity, what does eternal mean, and so that was kind of the start of a whole lot of questions then that I began to share with my elders, with my parents, with the pastor of our church. I grew up in a Methodist church. And what I found is that a lot of times they didn't have answers to my questions, and most of the time they didn't have a satisfactory answer to my question. And often they would acknowledge, well, we just don't know. These are matters of faith. Okay, what's faith? And so, just the question of what is faith became then an ongoing contemplation for me as a young person. And that definitely sparked an interest for me beyond my religion itself. I was being told, it was clear to me, it was obvious that I was being told our religion as we know it and practice it doesn't have all the answers. And I felt driven to pursue the answers, right? Ultimately, I had to deal with the whole issue of answers. Yeah. But at a young age, that's what I was seeking, was answers. I wanted to know. And that's what then, picking up those Masonic books off of my father's shelf and seeing that these Masonic authors were wrestling with the same questions that I was wrestling with, albeit at a much more sophisticated level than I was capable of, but that they were doing so by comparing what different religions and philosophies had to say in response to these questions. That had a huge impact on me, and so yes, my religious experience definitely led me toward Masonry. And I think it's similar experiences that are leading young men to Masonry today. They're having very similar experiences to the ones that I had all those years ago. And I'm not sure, Ranesh, if that really gets to answering your question. If you want a finer point, let me know.
No, it does. It does. I was actually trying to figure out, but in today's date, right, many people obviously say that they do not believe in the concept of God, or they do not actually,
Yes.
they are more attracted toward the atheism, or rather saying that there is no God, there is nothing called religion because it is messing up the existing system, and trying to talk with them. And especially when it comes to Freemasonry, right, like that itself is for us the basic necessity. Like the person should believe in a supreme being. Now, whenever we do speak with them, at least we are able to talk to them and tell them, okay, maybe the supreme being concept for you will be different and for me is different.
Yes.
I might have a Godhead, you might have a completely different concept. But
Yes.
when I have to talk with these people or anybody, these are the things which really matters. Now, whether they got the idea through religion, whether they got the idea through science, there has to be some way we should connect. And religion is something which is very important, because that's when we are able to have a conversation saying why this is important or why this is not important, or like where exactly the level is. So you are spot on with that answer. Actually, that kind of helps me in getting an idea of what I can ask in future, or rather what I can expect from somebody in future.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brother Chuck, you want to go, Sri?
No, please. After you, Sanjay.
Okay. You spoke about contemplative masonry, and my view is that when I got initiated, and subsequently even when we attend meetings, we are always told that whenever you need any answers, seek out for the brethren, go in the company of brethren, don't sit alone ever in a lodge or in the banquets. Mingle with people and talk to people, and then it'll start expanding your horizon. Now, if my understanding of contemplative masonry is that I reflect on the thoughts of the tools that are used in the craft, the rituals that happens inside a craft lodge. And if I have to contemplate on it, can I do a kind of a group contemplation? Or my idea of contemplation is kind of ruminating or meditating on these concepts, probably sitting in a corner of a room and not worried about the other brothers being present. Isn't there a clash between these two ideologies? Can you clarify on that, please?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Sanjay, because in my first book, it really was focused on individual practice. And I tried to put some statements in there about not limiting it to individual practice, but it nonetheless gives that impression frequently that I'm just focused on individual practice, and that the other aspects of the fraternal experience don't really assist us in our contemplative life. And so thank you for asking that question to give me the opportunity to clarify that we need both. It is important for us to have our solitary time, to be able to plumb deeply within ourselves. It is also important for us to join together in brethren in group experiences of meditation and prayer, but also group dialogue. There are some wonderful statements in the ritual here in the United States, and the common ritual, the Preston Webb versions of Blue Lodge, Craft Lodge ritual. The teachings on hearing from the Fellow Craft degree and the teachings on the Beehive from the Master Mason degree talk about the importance of our social interaction, and how I can't remember which of those two, but it is through our social interaction that we do, quote unquote, the noblest work of God is a phrase in the language. We need both, but the Masonic tradition encourages us to bring what we do as a solitary individual into the lodge with us so that we can have that sharing among brothers. And there's a synergy that then emerges from that. And this is one of the things that we definitely encourage in both the Academy of Reflection and the Masonic Legacy Society. And anybody who has experienced inner work done as an individual and inner work done together as a group knows how those two things feed on each other and continually kind of grow, lift each other up. So it's a wonderful, wonderful point. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Absolutely. As in most things in life, there's balance to be sought. It's not a binary either or situation. And in that context, I love the apocryphal story, which is recited often, and it applies both to a priest visiting somebody who's been going to church for the longest time, as well as a older brother visiting a Mason who's not been in lodge for a very long time. And they're sitting by the fireside, and all this priest stroke senior brother does is picks up piece of coal from the fireplace and leaves it outside, and sees how it just dies out so quickly while the rest of the fire is still burning bright. I think there's a bit of there's definitely something to be said about doing things in a group as well. And in that context, I suppose there's also, you talk a lot, Brother Chuck, of the spiritual aspect of things and spirituality per se, and you practice it as well. And irrespective of how you feel about organized religion, etc., there's something to be said about the energy that you feel in certain places, especially in a lot of places of worship, irrespective of faith, where you can actually experience that energy just by being there and being in the moment. But going back to also the religious aspect of things, do you think that historically, let me rephrase that, historically, after the two world wars, and especially after the Second World War, we're told that membership of lodges around the world spiked, and I guess a lot of it was due to what people had been through for the past so many years. And whilst we are obviously not in a warlike situation now, it must be said the pandemic is kind of something which touches everyone's lives around the world, and we have seen a lot of pain and sorrow as well, which is directly attributable to the pandemic, whether it's the loss of loved ones or it's economic loss, etc. So do you think that in the coming months, hopefully once the vaccine is available and we put COVID-19 behind us, that there is going to be a surge in membership? Do you foresee a lot of young men coming forward and saying, what, I would like to become a Freemason and join a lodge?
I think that that's a very real possibility. And particularly one of the things that I think may drive it is different from previous generations that have had these kind of post-crisis Masonic booms, is that during this crisis, Masons have been very publicly active online. Many of the education programs that have been held online have been open to non-Masons as well. And my perception is that the majority of the Masonic education sessions that are being provided online are of a spiritual and philosophical nature. There are some that are historical and so on, but the majority of them have this spiritual philosophical orientation. This is a wonderful advertising experience. I mean, you know, this is something we don't intentionally do in Freemasonry. We don't go around talking a whole lot about it and trying to coax people to join, but that's been an effect of this situation. And so I do think that's going to happen. I also think, along with that, that many of the Masons who were in lodges or other Masonic bodies that didn't have a strong educational component and didn't even realize that this was part of the Masonic experience have now been exposed to it and are going to want it to continue. And whether that means continuing virtually like we're doing here today at a distance, or whether it means actually bringing more into their Masonic bodies, we're going to see this now, I think, for at least a generation or so, continue to be a very strong part of the Masonic experience, a much stronger part than it had been.
Yeah, in continuation to Renesh's earlier point also about the younger generation perhaps not being as orthodox in their approach to religion. Freemasonry in that sense does provide a really great place for people who believe in God, who believe in a higher power, but are not comfortable with organized religion, because at the end of the day, organized religion is managed by human beings, and human beings who have all the failings that the rest of us have. You know, whether it is the corruption or the nepotism or any of the other, the politicization of organized religion, irrespective of which faith you belong to. So perhaps this is a great opportunity to show that yes, religion can be a force, or rather spirituality and a belief in a supreme being can be a force for good and can be a uniting force, as opposed to being a divisive force, which is unfortunately what organized religion for many young people is, unfortunately.
Yes, I think that's very well said. Certainly one of the things that we have seen going into the COVID situation, and has definitely been part of the American experience during COVID, is political divisions becoming more polarized, and so people are hungry for something to unite us, and something that doesn't have to be forced. You know, because oftentimes you look through the history of humanity, when division and polarization starts to happen, then often what people turn to try to heal that is force and violence. And it's a sad irony that's just that's happened so many times throughout history. But Freemasonry has offered an alternative to that for hundreds of years now, to say that even men, and of course there are branches of the fraternity now that are not limited to men, even people who would have been at war with each other over their religious and political differences could still come together in a moment of peace to acknowledge that we do have commonalities and things that unite us. That's a powerful message. And it's a message that the extremists of any religious or political position do not want the rest of us to embrace, and are working very hard to keep us from embracing. And we find some of those voices actually within the fraternity, but they're not the voice of the fraternity. It's not the voice that speaks through our ritual. And so I think one of the things that's important in our conversation here is acknowledging how important it is for us to always be coming back to what the ritual says. What is the ritual teaching us? What is the ritual asking of us? And when we do that, we find that it constantly encourages us to come together in ways that transcend these polarized points of view.
Brother Chuck,
Brother
I'll go back
Chuck,
to.
sorry. One moment. I wanted to just clear a few points up that you had spoken about earlier regarding your out-of-body experience as well. As you started off the lecture, I believe. So in this out-of-body experience that you talk about in the lodge, it's sort of like the observer's paradox. You know, when you observe something, it changes, and when you don't observe something, it remains. It takes
Yeah.
a different form up.
Yeah.
So what is your perception on maybe the observer's paradox with relations to your spiritual journey with the craft? I'd just like to get a small understanding of that.
A small understanding of that. 25 words or less, right?
You need to fit it onto a tweet.
Well, let me just, so I'm having some intuitive kind of responses here. Let me just speak from those rather than try to be kind of analytical and exquisitely logical about this. The first thing that comes to me in response to your question, Richard, is that experience of the observer state is one that, if you notice it and you pay attention to it, if you in hindsight recognize the difference of it, stimulates a lot of questions. You know, what the heck was that? So there's that question. And what does it mean? How can that happen? What does it say about what I am? And if you take those questions seriously, if you begin to give them attention and sit with them, it has an opening effect on one's being. You become open to possibilities that you wouldn't otherwise be, because if your understanding of who and what you are, the thing that looks for and gathers all of these answers that popular society and religion wants to provide us, if the questioner and the holder of answers suddenly has its own nature brought into question, and none of these other things answers the question about the nature of the questioner, of the observer, of the one who holds the answers, all those different parts of us, then to some degree you have to realize that there's no absolute trust that can be placed in any of those other answers. That there's something, as long as the part of us that asks questions and that seeks definitions, as long as that part of us is itself always in question and undefined ultimately, then how can we define anything else ultimately? And
I wanted to just point out one aspect, because with regards to this this ideology of yours, when we see the fraternity today, there is definitely a very clear disconnect between Freemasonry and spirituality.
yes,
I mean, they're not united in their approach in a lot of ways. You know, as you said, as in a lodge, you may have a certain group who will sit down and try the meditation, and others will sit and observe them, maybe to the extent of even being not very polite about it. You know, not thinking it's you know, not appropriate to the way they perceive Freemasonry at that point in time. You know,
yeah.
maybe go do this somewhere else. You know, this is not the place for this. You know, so this disconnect between Freemasonry and spirituality, how do you suggest we close this gap? How do we bridge this gap?
Yeah. I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. We have to point out that our ritual encourages us to do so. that the words that that we all as Freemasons strive to learn. You know, if you're going to learn ritual, you memorize all of these words, and in different jurisdictions, some of us have to learn a catechism in order to proceed from one degree to another. If you stop and really pay attention to those words, they repeatedly encourage us to do this deeper seeking within ourselves and between each other, with each other. And that if we're not doing that, then we're not really doing what we are saying with our mouths it means to be a Mason. What it means to be a Mason. We're choosing some little bits of it over here. Typically, oh, it's about brotherly love, right? That means fellowship and getting along with each other and having a good time. And so that's what it's really all about. That totally ignores so much of the rest of what ritual is saying. That brotherly love part is certainly important, and it becomes enriched by bringing these other parts in. But the ritual tells us we're supposed to be speculating, we're supposed to be contemplating, we're supposed to be practicing prayer together. And that doesn't mean doing just the rote prayers that are written out for us as the formal part of opening and closing the lodge, but it means a prayerful attitude in all that we do. We're supposed to seek the aid of deity before any great and noble undertaking. Those are all indications of what it means to be practicing Masonry. The practice of virtue, that in itself is a spiritual practice. If you look at the way we define the virtues in our ritual, and not every version of ritual does this, but in those versions of ritual where the virtues are actually defined, of course, we have among them the theological virtues, which very definitely have a spiritual import. But if you study the cardinal virtues, they do as well. They're not just about rules of behavior. We could get into the concept of karma yoga here and the idea that our external practice and what we do in interacting with the world is a spiritual practice. We could talk about bhakti and talk about how the experience of love and the practice of love, charity, the supreme theological virtue, right? That is a spiritual practice, and it's not just something we do externally, but that it has an internal component to it as well. All of these things can be pointed out to show that it's just Masonry. It's not about grafting something into Masonry that shouldn't be there. It's what our ritual tells us we should be doing.
But Freemasonry is not a religion per se at all. So then you're asking people to put spiritual energy into something they don't really fathom or understand. They cannot calibrate it in the form of what we're saying. So you're turning around in one aspect and saying this has not got anything to do with religion. It's not a religion, but you're going to be spiritual about it. You know, so now you've got people who are going to say that this is not Freemasonry, and other people are going to say this is not the idea of how I see Freemasonry. So this is a big gap we're dealing with over here. I mean, it's an issue. Yes. You know, even the drawback between the constraints. You know, in the new modern era, when we have people going to work, going to office, working, they don't even have the physical time. I mean, forget about the religion, the non-religion, all these aspects of it. They don't even get to lodge, you know, they can't spend time just speaking to brethren because it may be a lifestyle of hand to mouth with concerns to work or with concerns to responsibilities, you know. So these are very big existential crises in this new world of smorgasbord that we are presented with, you know. How do we define it?
One point, Brother Richard, and I think this is just to, add on to what you said. I like the way what Brother Chuck just told us, right? The activity, the work which we do for the society itself can also be presented in a spiritual aspect. Because what is it? Karma yoga, right? What he actually told us about. Now, we can tell everybody regarding the whole spiritual aspect, saying that, okay, this you need to be actually contemplating on certain things. And I can guarantee you, most of us will not be able to do that because we cannot concentrate on one point at all. Meditation is very difficult for some of us. I personally was never able to sit at one place for more than 5 seconds. So I somehow felt that I always used to have like really something is wrong with me that I need to concentrate here and there. But I like the way what he actually presented, that even if the spiritual aspect is there, even if we are trying to talk about meditation and everything, the karma part, the work which you're doing for the society, that itself can be fruitful. And when we present this point to a young mason or to a middle-aged mason or to an older mason on what you need to do for Freemasonry, doesn't always have to be the whole spiritual thing. It also can also be based on your work. How did you contribute to the society? What exactly have you done? That itself can be spoken about, or like talked about in the spiritual aspect. At least, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, if that is
But
what
religion is also there in the retrospect of this, doing the wrong thing, behaving correctly, not, I mean, there are all the sins and virtues, greed, gluttony, jealousy. I mean, this is all part of religion. I mean, we're still talking about the basic building blocks of a man
yes.
creating a moral platform like the ashlar, which is rough, that has
Huh.
to be smoothened. And that's a continuous process.
Absolutely.
So,
And I would like to bring the point which Sri actually mentioned right in the beginning. The biggest difference which I always used to feel between these two organizations, or at least I used to always feel, is here somebody is telling us to do, whereas Freemasonry gives us the pathway and you do it.
Yes.
And that is why I like the way Brother Chuck specifically mentioned that it is not an interpretation group. The group which he obviously was speaking about, there are no interpretation. You have to decide on your own. Now that itself is the biggest, I would say, the playground of your life, where you are given the tools around you and just play with it, make whatever you want to do with it. There are guidelines, obviously, like as a moral principle, there are guidelines, definitely. But there are no guidelines specifically saying, oh, this is absolutely wrong, you should have never thought about doing it. By doing that, am I harming somebody? Not exactly. Then what's the harm in doing it? Something, I might not be making any sense, but I guess everybody kind of got the gist that this is not something wherein there is a clear-cut dogmatic principle. This is very different from that.
Yeah, I'd like to just bring in Brother Chuck on this as well, because I think the larger point which I would like Brother Chuck to address is a when Richard talks about the value system, I think that's important. And Richard did mention the moral aspect of it. And that I think is key. It's not about any particular religion, because obviously Freemasonry doesn't recognize any religion. It's not a religion, but it does place equal emphasis on all religions. And therefore, if you look at the root of any religion, it's the core values are the same. If you really remove all the myths and the stories and the personalities at the very core of all religions, it's all about the your morality and your interaction with others, and how you go about that. So I think that's what Freemasonry emphasizes.
but Brother Shri, also that Freemasonry in itself has a huge Christian Judea perspective to it. So the universality of it, when you say if you're an Indian living in India, where does he fit into that principle of universality? So you have to understand, we have it in India, we understand it because we have our holy books and we can put the one we wish to put in front of it. But
Right.
the root of Freemasonry in itself is Christian Judea.
No, so I would actually differ slightly, and of course we'd like to get Brother Chuck in this as well. I think when you talk about craft masonry as opposed to the progressive orders, there is very little of Judeo-Christian doctrine or look. What is it that we, without giving anything away, if craft masonry is about allegories and drawing sort of lessons from allegorical examples, uh, and if the whole basis of that allegory is a building where you're starting with a foundation and building a superstructure, then you have to just pause and think back in the 18th century, in the 19th century, when the vast majority of people were not literate, and the only book or the only stories or the only writings they knew were those which were contained in the Old Testament or the New Testament. So, taking King Solomon's temple as an example of that building and using that as an example, I don't think gives a flavor of Judeo-Christian sort of doctrine, if you will, as some of the progressive orders do. And there also without going too much into that, I think at the end of the day, these are just stories which are told to us in ritual, which we have to think about and contemplate and imbibe in our daily lives, the way we feel. So I think this would be a good point to get in Brother Chuck and get his sense of, do you really feel that there is a lot of obviously the basis is Judeo-Christian, but I don't think there's too much of the doctrinaire aspect of Judaism or Christianity or any of the Abrahamic religions, but that's just my view. That's one. And the second question, which Ranesh was making, circling back to an earlier point I had made, Freemasonry is a very, very large tent. And you can be a good Freemason without being overly contemplative and spiritual. You can, as Brother Ranesh said, do it through good deeds instead of good words and good thoughts. Alternatively, even if you don't do that, even if you're the kind of Mason who just enjoys the company of your fellow Masons, the way I look at it is, and I've seen this at play, a lot of the brethren who come in may not have such a contemplative view of things or be as spiritually minded as I know Brother Richard is. But at the same time, all of them get influenced by the people around them and have a sort of common, lowest common denominator, if you will. The concept of, honoring charity, of trying to be good in their daily lives. All of that they just imbibe because of the company they keep and the things they hear, without actively seeking out any spiritual sort of revelations. So maybe, Chuck, if you could sort of address these very large and broad issues.
Yeah, it's a wonderful conversation we're having here, and I really appreciate the different questions and perspectives that each of you is bringing. I'm enjoying this thoroughly. So on that first point, I think that the creators of the craft ritual tried very hard to not make it overly Judeo-Christian. However, I'll give you one example that just seems like a neon sign to me, and that's the 3 theological virtues. The source of those virtues is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And the 3 theological virtues are a Christian doctrine. They're part of Christian doctrine. If you want to understand the 3 theological virtues the way the framers of our ritual would have understood it, then you have to study Christian theologians writing about faith, hope, and charity. To understand, first of all, that charity doesn't just mean philanthropy, generosity, right? That charity is actually a transcendent form of love for both humanity and the divine, and one that ultimately, I would say, argue, leads us to a non-dual perspective. And so there's that. If you want to understand the cardinal virtues, of course, the cardinal virtues were adopted by early Christian theologians as well, but we can go beyond them because they picked them up from the Neoplatonists and the Platonists, because Plato was the first to talk about the 4 cardinal virtues that we talk about. So what that points to me is that that really understanding the ritual from the perspective of the men who wrote it means we have to study Judeo-Christian sources to really understand why they put this symbol together with this idea, this concept, and so on. Now, do some of those things actually transcend Judeo-Christianity? Yes. I think they do. The idea of virtue certainly is not something that's limited to, Judaism or Christianity. All religions talk about virtue. And in fact, you can find correlates to our 3 theological and 4 cardinal virtues in every religion. How they deal with each of those may be somewhat different, but they're present. I think it is that which offers us that point of union with men of other faith is was saying, okay, let's focus on virtue. And let's focus within virtue on love as being the ultimate form of virtue, the ultimate expression of virtue. Okay. So that kind of deals with the first question. Help me again remember the second one now.
About how, being a Mason doesn't necessarily mean you have to
Yes.
be a particular type of Mason.
Yeah, this has been a huge deal and something that I've actually been pleased to participate in the United States, and even in my own progression as a Mason, as a contemplative. When I first came to the fraternity, all of this passion that you hear and you see that I have for the contemplative, and the way that our ritual speaks to it, was presented in a way, and I even use language like that's with you today, that if you're not seeing and hearing this in Masonic ritual, then you're not doing Masonry. And that's a dangerous message, and it's a message that I have ultimately come to disagree with. I think, just as Rinesh said, there's more than one way to be a Mason. But if you're going to try to be as whole of a Mason as you can be, then it means integrating all of these different ways of being a Mason. There's being the isolated contemplative who sits in meditation in the mornings or in the evenings or both. There is the meditation who goes out in the world and actually tries to live the virtues. And there's the Mason who does good works, who tries to be philanthropic and offer relief to people in need. There are all of these different ways, but ultimately, ritual suggests that integrating them is kind of the ideal. When we look at Hiram Abiff, for example, and who he was as a mythic character, he's like perfection. He integrates all of these different aspects of what it means to be a Mason. And so, that is the ideal, but we don't all have to strive for that. Some of us are more naturally gifted to work in different ways. My talent and my passion is for the contemplative part. And there have been times I know when I have been offensive in that passion by giving the message to other brothers that either you're not a Mason if you're not doing what I'm doing, or you're a lesser Mason if you're not doing what I'm doing. And so one of the things I have tried to communicate when I know my audience particularly is that I know brothers who aren't contemplative Masons that I consider to be mentors in Masonry, because I see the way they live their lives. And I see a goodness and a virtue in their life that I want to emulate. And I think that that's important, that basic kind of humility, if it can be real and genuine and authentic, because if you try to fake it, people will spot it in a heartbeat, is so important. And it took me, I had to learn it the hard way, because I was so passionate about this contemplative stuff coming into it.
You can't fake this one till you make it.
Brother Chuck, I probably it's an extension of what you spoke about karma yoga and other practices, but I'm going back to where I started with my question first. Professor James, who has written a paper on experimental psychology, he says that he took a whiff of nitrous oxide gas and he found a very beautiful a kind of an ecstasy where he could see the periphery and the center all rolling into one in one single conundrum. Do you think that transcendental meditation, which you claim to have, you seem to have practiced, and your contemplative masonry or your contemplative practice, has it ever led you into these kind of intuitive ecstasies?
Sanjay, I will just tell you that there isn't a spiritual experience out there that I have read about that I haven't had in some measure. In terms of visions, in terms of the kind of state that you described from William James, in terms of the unitive state. I haven't read of anything that I haven't at least dipped a toe into. There's not anything, I mean, sometimes people say, when they tell me that they're starting to practice and something happens, they'll come to me kind of, let me tell you, something really weird happened. You're going to think I'm really, really weird. And they describe it and I go, oh, okay. It's like, yes. I've had some unusual, let's say non-ordinary experiences.
But also, Brother Chuck, when you meditate, when you do any sort of spiritual activity, it immediately there is a karmic flow that comes back at you. So it's like you're pushing the universe to suddenly try to raise your kundalini and your energy. So there is always going to be a negative flow for us to move forward. The negativity is what moves us forward.
Brother Chuck, one last thing. I had this question in my mind right from the beginning and I want to obviously ask this to all of our speakers who come. If you ever have to suggest a book or a topic for the guys who are sitting here and talking to you and those who are going to listen to you in future, a book which obviously not the one which you have written, this is obviously an amazing one. So this is definitely there in our library. But if there is any book which you actually have read and have made you think or enjoy, which would that be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Masonry or non-masonry doesn't matter, but just.
Well, I'll take each category. I'll give you one book in each category. I don't do favorites. I can't say that these either are my favorite books, but they're the ones that come to mind first. So the first book that comes to mind Masonically is Masonic Initiation by Wilmshurst. Anything by Wilmshurst I would recommend. And on the non-Masonic side, I'm going to go back to the Upanishads. I'm particularly fond of the Brihadaranyaka. I love the dialogues in that text on the nature of Atman, and particularly between is it Yagnavalkya and Maitri, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, he essentially describes how everything is a love affair with Atman, and then goes on to talk about how everything to those who love Atman, everything is honey. Every experience is honey. So it's just such a beautiful text, and ask me on another day at another time, and I'll give you something completely different.
Yajnavalkya was the propounder of the Krishna Yajurveda, the Shukla Yajurveda, and obviously after his fight with his guru Vaishampayana, when he said he doesn't want his guru's help anymore, and he would go out and practice his penances, and his guru said, okay, then spit it out, whatever I have taught you. And so whatever he spit out was basically the teachings of the Vedas and the other Upanishads, which were lying on the ground, and Vaishampayana ordered his other Sishyas to convert themselves into birds and swallow those meat or the organs which were lying on the ground. And that became the Taittiriya Upanishad. So it's a wonderful story and exposition further on that. We can, Richard, I think you need to share Chuck's mail ID and his mobile number as well. I'm going to send you a couple of things. You spoke about the meditative aspects and things, and you told us how to fix ourselves, the position of the blazing star. And I'll send you some of the things which I do as a commercial activity as well on how to improve the sensory and the intuitive perceptions of children below the age of 15. I'll just send that to you. You can have a look at it.
Wonderful.
I think we definitely need one more session with Chuck. That is for sure. We definitely need it. We are going to plan that.
Valentine's Day special.
Nice.
Okay. So Shri, Over to you to bring us home.
Sorry, I think I may have to unmute myself first. Well, thank you, Chuck, for that. That was just, as always, it's such a pleasure to listen to you. We could have just gone on, and I think another session would not be remiss at all. As for you, the audience, thank you so very much for joining us. We hope that you found something special as well, special and informative. We look forward to interacting with you through our social media handles, where you can express your opinions, views, or even post queries about Freemasonry. Links are in the description below. So join us again next time for an all-new episode. Until then, please hit that subscribe button, press the bell icon, and if you like the show, then give us a thumbs up. And join us at the same Masonic time, same Masonic place. And until we meet again, let us now part on the square. Goodbye.